The fluorescent lights of Courtroom 7 billion buzzed overhead as Sarah Chen adjusted her simple ponytail, her fingers brushing against the worn fabric of her navy sweater. At 19, she looked exactly like what Judge William Harrison assumed she was, just another teenager who'd wandered into his courtroom. The security guard had already stopped her twice, asking if she was lost on her way to a school tour. Perfect. Bol. Sarah glanced at her reflection in her phone's dark screen. No makeup, casual clothes, and beat-up sneakers, the perfect disguise for someone who'd graduated from Harvard Law School 2 years ago. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, "Never let them see you coming, Sarah. The element of surprise is sometimes the strongest weapon in your arsenal." The stakes couldn't be higher today. Beside her sat Marcus Thompson, her best friend since 7th grade, when they'd bonded over their shared love of coding and justice. Now he faced felony theft charges, accused of stealing $50,000 from TechFront Solutions, the startup where he worked as a junior developer. His dark skin had grown ashen over the weeks of preparation, his usually confident posture crushed under the weight of assumptions and accusations. "You don't have to do this," Marcus whispered, tugging at his ill-fitting suit jacket. "I can get a public defender." Sarah squeezed his hand under the table. "The last public defender told you to take a plea deal for something you didn't do. Not happening." As she watched the gallery fill with spectators, Sarah's mind drifted back to the day that set her on this path. She'd been 14, sitting in the back of a courtroom much like this one, watching her uncle lose everything because his lawyer had been unprepared and overwhelmed. That night, she'd made a decision that changed her life. The accelerated high school program had been just the beginning. Her parents, both professors at Vanderbilt, had supported her unconventional path, helping her navigate the complex web of educational requirements. While other kids attended prom, Sarah was burning through undergraduate courses. When her peers started college, she was already diving into tort law and constitutional theory at Harvard. All rise. The Honorable Judge William Harrison presiding. Sarah stood, feeling the familiar flutter in her stomach. Not nervousness, anticipation. Judge Harrison swept into the courtroom, his black robes billowing behind him. His reputation preceded him 30 years on the bench, known for his sharp mind and sharper tongue. Also known for his traditional views and quick judgments. "Be seated," he commanded, settling into his chair with the air of someone who expected complete deference. His eyes swept the courtroom, pausing briefly on Sarah with a hint of annoyance. "First case, State of Tennessee versus Marcus Thompson. Are all parties present?" The prosecutor, James Morton, stood first. "James Morton for the state, Your Honor." Sarah rose slowly, letting her youth show in every movement. "Sarah Chen for the defense, Your Honor." The silence that followed was exactly what she'd expected. Judge Harrison peered over his reading glasses, his face a study in disbelief. "Young lady, where is Mr. Thompson's attorney?" "I am Mr. Thompson's attorney, Your Honor. Tennessee Bar number 35792. The judge's face flushed red. "Is this some kind of prank? Because if it is, you're about 10 seconds away from a contempt charge." Sarah pulled out her bar card, her movements deliberate and calm. "No prank, Your Honor. I'm licensed to practice in Tennessee and was retained by Mr. Thompson for his defense." As the bailiff brought her credentials to the bench, Sarah remembered her bar exam day. She'd been 17, surrounded by people a decade older, their whispers following her through the testing center. She'd finished 2 hours early and scored in the top percentile. The same whispers had followed her through her first year of practice, working pro bono cases from a tiny office above her parents' garage. Judge Harrison examined her credentials with growing irritation. "Ms. Chen, while these appear to be in order, this is a serious felony case. Mr. Thompson is facing significant prison time. Don't you think he deserves a more experienced attorney?" "Your Honor," Sarah replied, letting steel enter her voice for the first time. "My client deserves an attorney who believes in his innocence and is prepared to prove it. My age has no bearing on my capabilities or my commitment to justice." The gallery stirred, and Sarah caught snippets of whispered comments. "Can't be real, must be some mistake, poor kid's going to jail." Judge Harrison's gavel cracked against the sound block. "Ms. Chen, I've been practicing law since before you were born. This isn't a mock trial or a school project. This is a real courtroom with real consequences." "I'm well aware, Your Honor. Would you like to review my record?" 3 acquittals in felony cases over the past year, though I suspect you haven't heard of them because my clients were all deemed unlikely to succeed by more experienced attorneys. The judge's eyes narrowed. Watch your tone, counselor. Very well, if Mr. Thompson wants to risk his future on a novice, that's his choice. Proceed with the arraignment. As the proceedings began, Sarah felt Marcus tense beside her. She understood his fear. The evidence looked overwhelming on paper access logs, suspicious purchases, damning testimonies from his co-workers. But Sarah had spent the last month unraveling the truth, finding the threads that would expose the real story. She thought back to her first meeting with Marcus after his arrest. They'd sat in the visitation room, the same table where they used to share lunch in middle school, now separated by thick glass. They think because I'm young and black and like nice things, I must be guilty, he'd said, his voice breaking. No one's even asking questions, Sarah. They just assumed. That's when she'd decided to use their assumptions against them. If they wanted to judge by appearances, she'd give them something to judge. Every casual outfit, every youthful gesture was carefully calculated to lower their guard, to make them underestimate her. Let them see a teenager playing lawyer. They wouldn't see the hundreds of hours of preparation, the meticulous investigation, the carefully laid trap until it was too late. Ms. Chen, are you ready to enter a plea? Judge Harrison's impatient voice cut through her memories. Sarah stood, her sneakers silent on the polished floor. Yes, Your Honor. My client pleads not guilty. Of course he does, the judge muttered, just loud enough to be heard. Very well. Trial is set for immediate hearing as previously scheduled. Ms. Chen, I strongly suggest you reconsider your strategy. The state's evidence is substantial. Sarah felt a smile tugging at her lips. Your Honor, appearances can be deceiving. I think we're about to demonstrate that in more ways than one. As she sat down, Sarah caught a glimpse of the prosecutor's smug expression. James Morton had dismissed her request for discovery with patronizing amusement, sending over files without bothering to check what he'd included. His mistake. In those files, buried under hundreds of pages of financial records, she'd found the key to everything. Marcus leaned over, his voice trembling. They all think I'm going to jail. Sarah opened her laptop, revealing dozens of tabs of research, financial records, and surveillance footage stills. Let them think what they want, she whispered back. By the time this is over, they'll learn what my professors learned, what the bar examiners learned, and what every opposing counsel learns: never judge a book by its cover. The bailiff called the first witness, and Sarah straightened her sweater, ready to begin. In her mind, she heard her father's favorite quote: the universal mistake of mankind is to judge by appearances. Today she was going to turn that mistake into her greatest weapon. Assistant District Attorney James Morton rose from his chair with the confident air of someone who'd already won. His opening statement flowed smoothly, each word carefully chosen to paint Marcus Thompson as a young man seduced by greed and opportunity. The evidence will show. Morton declared that the defendant exploited his position of trust, using his technical expertise to steal $50,000 from a company that gave him a chance. A clear-cut case of theft, Your Honor, proven through digital records, suspicious purchases, and witness testimony. Sarah watched the jury as Morton spoke, noting their subtle reactions. 7 men, 5 women. 3 of them had already written Marcus off, their crossed arms and slight frowns telling her everything she needed to know. But the others, they were still listening, still wondering. Ms. Chen, Judge Harrison's voice dripped with condescension. Your opening statement. Sarah stood, letting her sleeve fall back to reveal a friendship bracelet Marcus had made her in 8th grade. A calculated move let them see youth, informality, inexperience. Thank you, Your Honor. The defense's opening will take approximately 12 minutes. The judge's eyebrows shot up at her precise time estimate. A small crack in his assumptions, just as planned. Ladies and gentlemen. Sarah began, her voice clear but intentionally casual. This case isn't about complex financial crimes or sophisticated hacking. It's about something much simpler: the difference between correlation and causation, between assumption and fact, between appearing guilty and being guilty. She moved away from the podium, a breach of traditional courtroom protocol that made Judge Harrison shift irritably in his seat. The prosecution will show you login records proving Marcus accessed the financial system. They'll show you security footage of him entering the building late at night. They'll show you receipts for expensive purchases. And every single piece of evidence will be absolutely true and completely misleading. Misleading. A juror in the back row leaned forward slightly. Good. Because the truth, which the evidence will show, is that Marcus Thompson was set up by someone who counted on our assumptions. Someone who knew that when money disappeared and a young black man in sneakers had made recent purchases, no one would look any further. Someone who understood that sometimes the perfect crime isn't about not leaving evidence, it's about making sure someone else looks guilty. MS. Chen. Judge Harrison interrupted. This is an opening statement, not a crime novel. Yes, Your Honor. I'm simply outlining the defense's theory of the case, as is my right under Tennessee Rules of Criminal Procedure, Rule 29.01. The judge's mouth tightened at her precise citation. Another crack. Morton presented his first witness, TechFront's head of security, Richard Walsh. Sarah watched him take the oath, remembering the security footage she'd spent nights analyzing frame by frame. Mr. Walsh, Morton began. Please tell us about the night of March 15th. Our systems detected a large transfer at approximately 11:45 p.m. Security logs show Mr. Thompson's keycard accessing the building at 11:20 p.m., and his login credentials were used to authorize the transfer. Morton displayed the security logs on the courtroom screens. Prosecution Exhibit A, Your Honor. Mr. Walsh, in your expert opinion, could these logs have been falsified? No, sir. Our security system is state-of-the-art. Any tampering would leave traces. Sarah stood for cross-examination, pulling up her worn laptop. Mr. Walsh, you said tampering would leave traces. What kind of traces exactly? Well, metadata changes, access logs, that sort of thing. Could you be more specific about that sort of thing? Perhaps explain the difference between a Level 1 and Level 2 security protocol in your system. Walsh hesitated. Sarah pressed on. Or maybe you could explain how your state-of-the-art system handles SHA-256 encryption for authentication tokens. Objection, Morton called out. Relevance. Your Honor, Sarah responded. The prosecution opened the door by having Mr. Walsh testify as an expert on the security system's reliability. I'm establishing the scope of his expertise. Judge Harrison frowned. Overruled. The witness will answer. Walsh shifted uncomfortably. I'm not familiar with those technical details. I oversee the security team. So you can't actually testify about whether the system could be tampered with, can you? Because you don't understand how it works. I suppose not, Walsh admitted. Sarah pulled up another document, Defense Exhibit 1, Your Honor. TechFront security audit from last quarter, showing 3 critical vulnerabilities in their authentication system. Mr. Walsh, did you address these vulnerabilities? I wasn't aware of them. The jury stirred. Another crack in the prosecution's case. As the day progressed, Sarah maintained her carefully crafted balance, mixing precise technical knowledge with youthful energy, letting her expertise peek through the cracks of her casual demeanor. Each time Judge Harrison interrupted her with a condescending remark, she responded with a relevant legal citation or procedural rule, watching his frustration grow. During the lunch break, Marcus grabbed her arm in the conference room. Sarah, you're amazing, but they still have the financial records. The purchases I made. Tell me about the watch again, she said, pulling out a manila envelope. My grandmother's inheritance. I bought it the day after she passed. It was always her dream for me to have something really nice, something no one could look down on. His voice cracked. But the timing was perfect for someone setting you up, Sarah finished. Trust me, Marcus. Remember when Tommy Parker stole your coding project in 9th grade and tried to pass it off as his? A slight smile crossed his face. You proved it was mine by showing the timestamps in the source code comments. Same principle. People who think they're clever often make simple mistakes. They count on nobody looking closely enough. Back in court, Morton presented his trump card, the financial records showing Marcus's purchases immediately after the theft. The evidence seemed damning: a luxury watch, a down payment on a car, new electronics. Your Honor, Sarah said during cross-examination of the CFO, I'd like to present Defense Exhibit 2. She displayed a series of documents on the screen: bank statements, a will, insurance paperwork. These records show that my client received an inheritance of $65,000 from his grandmother, Eleanor Thompson, but 3 days before the alleged theft. The prosecution had these documents in discovery but failed to mention them. Why would someone who just received a legal windfall risk everything to steal a smaller amount? Judge Harrison leaned forward, his interest finally piqued despite himself. Mr. Morton, were you aware of these documents? We believed the timing was suspicious, Your Honor. Suspicious. Sarah's voice took on an edge. Like a young black man buying a nice watch is suspicious. Like staying late to finish a project is suspicious. The prosecution isn't presenting evidence, they're presenting prejudice with exhibits. MS. Chen. Judge Harrison warned. My apologies, Your Honor. Let me rephrase. Sarah turned back to the CFO. Sir, could you explain why Marcus's supervisor approved his late-night access to the financial systems? The CFO blinked. His supervisor. Yes, according to company policy, after-hours access requires supervisor approval. I have the policy right here as Defense Exhibit 3. Who approved Marcus's access? I approved it directly, without consulting his supervisor? Why? The CFO's face paled slightly. Sarah pressed on, each question another piece of the trap she'd laid. And while we're discussing approvals, could you explain these after-hours login records from your account? The ones that show you accessing the system at 3 a.m., shortly after the theft. Morton jumped to his feet. Objection. Beyond the scope. Your Honor, Sarah responded, her casual demeanor dropping completely for the first time. These records go directly to our theory of the case. Someone with high-level access setting up my client to take the fall. The prosecution opened the door by presenting the security logs. Judge Harrison studied her for a long moment, seeing her perhaps clearly for the first time. Overruled. The witness will answer. As the CFO stumbled through his explanation, Sarah caught Marcus's eye. He was sitting straighter now, hope beginning to replace fear. She thought about all the times they'd studied together in high school, him teaching her coding while she helped him with English essays. How he'd been the first person to take her dream of being a lawyer seriously, never once laughing at the idea of a 14-year-old planning for law school. The rest of the afternoon was a careful dance of evidence and implications. Sarah let the prosecution present their seemingly airtight case while systematically laying the groundwork for what was to come. She watched Judge Harrison's attitude shift from condescension to curiosity to grudging respect, though he still couldn't resist the occasional jab at her youth. Just before adjournment, she called her final witness of the day, Marcus's immediate supervisor, James Chen, no relation, appearing via video conference from a tech conference in Singapore. Mr. Chen, did you authorize Marcus Thompson to access the financial systems after hours on March 15th? No, I was never asked. In fact, I was surprised to learn he had that access level. Junior developers don't typically need it. And if he had requested it, I would have denied it. There was no project requiring that access. Sarah nodded, setting up her final question of the day. One last thing, Mr. Chen. The prosecution claims Marcus used his technical expertise to hide the theft. In your professional opinion, does Marcus have the skills to bypass the security systems as alleged? The supervisor shook his head. Absolutely not. Marcus is talented, but he's still learning. The kind of hack they're describing would require senior-level expertise and intimate knowledge of our financial systems. Knowledge like a CFO would have. Objection, Morton shouted. Withdrawn, Sarah said smoothly. No further questions, Your Honor. As the court adjourned for the day, she could feel the shift in the room. The prosecution's airtight case had sprung several leaks, and tomorrow she would blow it wide open. But for now, she packed up her battered laptop and worn backpack, maintaining her carefully crafted image until the last person left the courtroom. In the hallway, Marcus hugged her tightly. You're really doing it, he whispered. You're actually going to prove it. Sarah grinned, finally letting her professional mask slip. Just wait until tomorrow, when they learn what a teenage lawyer can really do. The morning sun streamed through the courthouse windows as Sarah Chen prepared for her final move. She'd spent the night reviewing her evidence one last time, though she'd memorized every detail weeks ago. On her desk lay a single manila folder, her silver bullet. But court is in session, Judge Harrison announced, his voice carrying a note of curiosity that hadn't been there yesterday. "Ms. Chen, call your next witness." Sarah stood, her casual sweater and ponytail still in place. "The defense calls Lisa Martinez, Your Honor." A ripple of confusion passed through the courtroom as a nervous-looking woman approached the stand. The prosecution hadn't interviewed her, hadn't even listed her as a potential witness. As far as they knew, she was just another TechFront employee. "But Ms. Martinez, what is your position at TechFront Solutions?" "I'm the senior accountant," she replied, her voice barely audible. "And how long have you held that position?" 7 years. Sarah moved closer to the witness stand. "In your 7 years, have you ever noticed any irregularities in the company's financial records?" Objection. Morton jumped to his feet. "Relevance." "Your Honor," Sarah responded calmly, "this goes directly to our theory of the case. The prosecution claims my client executed a sophisticated financial theft. Ms. Martinez's testimony will show that someone else had both the means and the pattern of behavior to commit this crime." Judge Harrison studied her for a moment. "I'll allow it, but keep it focused, Ms. Chen." "Ms. Martinez, please answer the question." The accountant gripped the edge of the witness stand. "Yes, over the past year I've noticed several unusual patterns." Sarah displayed a document on the courtroom screen. "Defense Exhibit 7, Your Honor." "Ms. Martinez, could you explain what we're looking at?" "These are internal transfers between our operating and investment accounts. They're backdated to appear as if they happened during business hours, but the metadata shows they were processed at 3 a.m. And who has the authority to backdate transactions?" "Only Mr. Phillips, the CFO." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Harrison's gavel cracked sharply. "Order." Sarah pulled up another document. "Defense Exhibit 8. Ms. Martinez, is this an email exchange between you and Mr. Phillips?" "Yes, I questioned one of the transfers last month. He told me to mind my own business if I wanted to keep my job." Objection. Morton called again. "Hearsay. Exception, Your Honor. Statement by a party opponent, as Mr. Phillips is now effectively a prosecution witness, and statement against interest." Judge Harrison's eyebrows rose at her quick citation of evidence rules. Overruled. Sarah pressed on. "Ms. Martinez, did you notice anything unusual on the night of March 15th? "Yes, I was working late, finishing month-end reports. I saw Mr. Phillips enter the building around 11 p.m. Shortly after, I received an automated alert about a large transfer. When I checked the next morning, the records showed MOCKS had processed it." "But you saw Mr. Phillips that night?" "Yes," and she hesitated, then straightened her shoulders. "I have security footage." Morton shot to his feet. "Your Honor, this is the first we're hearing of this footage." "Because Ms. Martinez only provided it to me yesterday," Sarah responded. "Defense Exhibit 9, Your Honor. Time-stamped security footage showing Mr. Phillips entering the server room at 11:23 p.m. on March 15th, using Marcus's stolen credentials." As the footage played, Sarah turned to the CFO, who had gone pale in his seat. "Mr. Phillips, would you like to explain why you were using my client's login credentials that night?" The CFO stood abruptly. "I want a lawyer." The courtroom exploded into chaos. Sarah raised her voice above the commotion. "Your Honor, I move for an immediate dismissal of all charges against my client. Furthermore, I'm submitting evidence to the district attorney's office showing that Mr. Phillips has embezzled over $300,000 in the past year, framing my client for the most recent theft." Judge Harrison banged his gavel repeatedly. "Order. Order in this court." Once the room quieted, he turned to Sarah. Ms. Chen approached the bench. "Mr. Morton, you too." As they gathered at the bench, the judge's face was a mix of emotions. "Ms. Chen, you've been sitting on this evidence." "No, Your Honor. Ms. Martinez came forward yesterday after watching the prosecution's case and realizing they were about to convict an innocent man. The rest I gathered through careful review of discovery materials the prosecution provided but never thoroughly examined. Because they assumed a teenager in sneakers couldn't possibly find what seasoned prosecutors missed. The judge's voice carried a hint of self-awareness. "Assumptions can be powerful weapons, Your Honor, when wielded properly." Judge Harrison removed his glasses, cleaning them slowly. "Ms. Chen, I believe I owe you an apology. I made assumptions about your capabilities based on your appearance and age. That was unprofessional of me. Thank you, Your Honor, but the apology belongs to my client, who spent weeks under suspicion because people saw what they expected to see. The judge nodded gravely. Mr. Morton, do you wish to proceed with the charges? The prosecutor shook his head. No, Your Honor. The state moves to dismiss all charges against Mr. Thompson. Motion granted. Judge Harrison turned to the courtroom. The charges against Marcus Thompson are dismissed with prejudice. Bailiff, please take Mr. Phillips into custody. Ms. Chen. Yes, Your Honor. Honor. Would you mind sharing your background with the court? I believe we could all benefit from this lesson in humility. Sarah turned to address the courtroom, finally letting her professional demeanor fully show. I graduated high school at 14 through an accelerated program, completed my undergraduate degree in 2 years at Vanderbilt, then attended Harvard Law School on a full scholarship, graduated magna cum laude at 17, passed the bar the same year. I've been practicing law for 2 years, specializing in cases where appearances and assumptions have led to miscarriage of justice. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. I dress this way, she continued, gesturing to her casual clothes, because people's assumptions about a teenage girl in a sweater and sneakers make them careless. They don't hide evidence carefully enough. They don't take the time to cover their tracks. They don't believe they need to try their hardest to win. And that's usually when the truth comes out. Marcus was openly crying now, his shoulders shaking with relief. Sarah walked back to the defense table and squeezed his hand. Judge Harrison cleared his throat. This court owes Mr. Thompson an apology. Ms. Chen, your strategy was unorthodox but brilliant. You've taught this old judge a valuable lesson about the danger of prejudgment. As the courtroom began to clear, reporters already rushing to file their stories, Sarah packed up her worn backpack one last time. She pulled out a crisp suit jacket and slipped it on over her sweater, transforming from uncertain teenager to confident attorney in one smooth motion. Morton approached her, shaking his head in admiration. That was masterfully played, counselor. The Harvard Law Review article you published on digital evidence in financial crimes, that was you too, wasn't it? Under a different name, Sarah smiled. Amazing how many people don't bother to check when they think they already know everything about you. Marcus hugged her tightly. You did it. You really did it. We did it, she corrected. Your trust in me made this possible. Ready to go back to work. Actually, Judge Harrison interrupted, approaching them. Mr. Thompson, TechFront's board has authorized me to extend an apology and an offer. They'd like to promote you to head of security compliance, given your first-hand experience with their system's vulnerabilities. Ms. Chen. The State Bar Association would be honored if you'd give a lecture series on digital evidence and bias in the justice system. Sarah looked at her friend, seeing the joy and vindication on his face. Thank you, Your Honor. I believe we'd both be happy to help ensure this doesn't happen to anyone else. As they walked out of the courthouse, Marcus nudged her shoulder. So no more sweaters and sneakers. Sarah grinned, her Harvard Law ring finally visible on her finger. Oh, I'll keep them handy. You never know when someone else will need to learn not to judge a book by its cover. 1 month after the Thompson case, the Memphis County Courthouse buzzed with a different kind of energy. Where once whispers had followed Sarah Chen with doubt and derision, now they carried notes of respect and admiration. The Tennessee Bar Association's monthly newsletter featured her on its cover, under the headline Redefining Excellence, Age, Appearance, and Justice. Judge William Harrison stood at the podium in the courthouse's main hall, addressing a packed room of attorneys, law students, and media. The man who had once dismissed Sarah with condescension now spoke of her with profound respect. In 30 years on the bench, I've learned many lessons about justice, he began, his voice carrying the weight of humility. But none quite as powerful as the one taught to me by Ms. Sarah Chen. We in the legal profession pride ourselves on pursuing truth and justice blind to prejudice, yet too often we allow our own biases to cloud our judgment. Sarah sat in the front row, now dressed in a tailored suit that balanced her youth with her professionalism. Beside her, Marcus Thompson, recently promoted to head of security compliance at TechFront, beamed with pride. Ms. Chen didn't just win a case, Harrison continued. She held a mirror to our profession's prejudices. She showed us how quick we are to dismiss those who don't fit our preconceptions of what a lawyer should look like, sound like, or be like. The judge's words resonated through the hall as he announced the establishment of the Chen Initiative, a mentorship program for young lawyers from unconventional backgrounds. Sarah would serve as its first director, working to ensure that talent and dedication weren't overlooked because of age, appearance, or background. After the ceremony, Sarah found herself surrounded by law students, many close to her age, seeking advice and inspiration. The law doesn't care how old you are, she told them, or what you wear, or how others see you. It cares about truth, justice, and the courage to pursue them. Marcus joined her as the crowd dispersed. Remember when we used to talk about changing the world in middle school, he asked, adjusting his new security badge. Look at you now. Sarah smiled, thinking of the worn sweater and sneakers carefully preserved in her office, a reminder of the power of being underestimated. Look at us both. Sometimes the best way to fight prejudice is to let people's assumptions work against them. As they walked out of the courthouse, Sarah passed a young girl watching her with wide eyes. She stopped and knelt down to the child's level. Never let anyone tell you you're too anything to follow your dreams, she said softly. Sometimes the people who don't look like they belong are exactly the ones who need to be there. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps, where a new plaque had been installed. It read, "Justice sees not with eyes, but with truth," in honor of the Chen Initiative, dedicated to looking beyond appearances in pursuit of justice.